A second person who dined with President Donald Trump at his Mar-a-Lago resort last weekend during a visit by Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has tested positive for COVID-19, according to Trump's physician Dr. Conley.
The first person who interacted with the president was Fabio Weingarten, a top communications aide to Bolsonaro who posed in photos next to Trump. A third person who was at Mar-a-Lago on Sunday for a Trump fundraiser has also tested positive, but it's unclear if the person came into contact with Trump, The Washington Post reported, citing an email from Republican Party officials.
The White House doctor insisted there was still no need to swab or quarantine the president. The president had earlier suggested that he would, most likely, be getting tested fairly soon.
The now toxic dinner took place last weekend when the Brazilian delegation visited the president's Florida getaway. This evening we learned of another dinner guest, this one sharing the table with the president and White House delegation, who was symptom-free until this morning and has since tested positive for COVID-19, the statement from Conley said. These interactions would be categorized as low risk for transmission.
Conley added, citing guidelines the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention have laid out. As such, there is no indication for home quarantine at this time.
Conley did not name the new dinner guest, but the Brazilian embassy to the U.S. on Saturday tweeted that Ambassador Nestor Forster tested positive. Brazil's Chargé d'Affaires Ambassador Nestor Forster has learned tonight that he has tested positive for COVID-19, the embassy wrote in a tweet. Following medical advice, Amb. Forster will extend his self-quarantine, which he had already placed himself into as a precautionary measure, for another 2 weeks.
As a standard measure of practice, the World Health Organization has recommended that anyone coming into contact with a person testing positive for COVID-19 should self-quarantine for 2 weeks. Under those guidelines, the entire Mar-a-Lago staff and American delegation should isolate.
The Brazilian coronavirus cluster is not the only exposure the president has had to the contagious virus. He was also potentially exposed through several people who came in contact with a person who attended the Conservative Political Action Conference (CPAC) in National Harbor, Maryland, who later tested positive.
Forster, Weingarten and Bolsonaro were part of a delegation who traveled to the U.S. over the weekend and met with multiple high-level officials. The group dined at Mar-a-Lago with Trump, National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien and Trump's daughter and son-in-law, Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner.
On Sunday, the Brazilian delegation met with U.S. military Southern Command senior leaders. On Monday, the delegation met with Senator Rick Scott, RFL, at the Hilton Miami downtown. Scott said Thursday that he would be tested for COVID-19 and would self-quarantine for 2 weeks.
Miami Mayor Francis Suarez, who attended an event with Bolsonaro and his press secretary in Miami on Monday, told the Miami Herald on Friday that he had since tested positive for COVID-19.
The Miami Police Department's entire motorcycle patrol unit said they would self-quarantine after escorting the delegation around Miami.
Team Trump has finally found itself in a crisis it cannot propagandize its way out of. Unfortunately, this has not led Team Trump, the administration and its various Fox News-based media arms, to pivot to the brash notion of telling the truth. No, of course not.
For the first time ever, though, Team Trump is very confused about which lie to tell. Historically, the Trump administration and Fox News have been meticulous messengers, able to turn almost everything into a way to own the libs. But COVID-19 is providing Trump very few opportunities for lib ownership.
Previously, before we hit the crisis stage, we got weeks of obfuscation, and the president's conviction that it's going away. We want it to go away with very, very few deaths. Now, Trumpists are trying to grapple with the possibility that the global pandemic may in fact be real. As COVID-19 has decimated Italy, killed thousands of Chinese nationals, and spread like a brush fire through at least 47 states, it's becoming harder and harder for Trumpists to deny the truth.